All right, on the podcast this week, I'm joined by Nora McCormack. Nora just got done finishing the Appalachian Trail after 5.5 months hiking. It's 2,300 miles, starts in Georgia, ends in Maine on Mount Katahdin. It's an amazing accomplishment, not only physically, but mentally. And she kind of runs us through the whole thing, the logistics, some of the challenges, people she met, how it feels to summit on that last day. It's a great story. Really enjoyed our conversation. I think you'll really like it. So this is the Randy Forcier podcast. To support it, you could subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Would really appreciate that. Thanks so much for listening. As always, here's Nora. All right, I'm joined by Nora McCormack. How you doing, Nora?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. Super pumped to have you on today. I was just telling you that I don't know anyone that has hiked the Appalachian Trail from beginning to end. You're the first person that I've ever talked to about it. I think it's just the coolest thing ever. And I want to hear all about your story. That sound good?
That sounds good to me. Before we started live, I was saying, like, after completing, everyone says you have like a 2-week window to talk about the trail before people get sick of you just talking about it endlessly. And I thank you for the opportunity for me to keep talking about it, not just harassing the same people over and over again, regaling tales of the trail. So
And this will be an online record of your story too. So I don't know if you've done anything else online that'll be saved forever on the internet, but at least this will be here for you to look back on at some point down the road as well.
Oh, good. So I will censor myself. Good. No, got it.
So what made you want to do the Appalachian Trail?
So I grew up, my dad, I blame him for planting this seed. Growing up, we would always do something different outside every other week, whether it was a new different hike or paddle or camping spot. I just grew up with an appreciation for the outdoors. And I actually remember the day that I learned about the trail. It was September 19th, 1999.
Mm-hmm.
I was up in Grafton Notch in Maine, hiking just a short little loop with my dad. And when we got back down to the parking lot we picked up a hitchhiker, which growing up, you say like, no, you'd never pick up hitchhikers. Yeah. They'll murder you. They're bad people. So my dad was like, oh, we're going to pick this guy up. I'm like, isn't that dangerous? He's like, no, this is different. And so it was a thru hiker who we were bringing him a ride back into town so he could resupply. And I asked him like, oh, where did you hike from? And he said, Georgia. And I'm like the state, Georgia, like by Florida? He's like, yeah, no. It never occurred to me that you could do that. Like I've been hiking on the Appalachian Trail a number of times since I was about 6 years old, but I didn't even know that it was this one long continuous trail that stretched along the East Coast of the United States. So I actually found a diary entry from my high school diary from that day that said, we picked up a hitchhiker. He walked all the way from Georgia. I want to do that someday. So, 24 years later, I was able to make it a reality, which was really cool.
That is so cool. Yeah. So I did not even realize it was a thing either till much later. Honestly, I think we hiked Katahdin, and up till that point, I had heard about what the Appalachian Trail was, but I don't think I knew exactly what it was. So we did it, and I found out like that's the end of the Appalachian Trail. And I was like, wait, so Georgia? I'm like, how many miles is it?
This year, the trail was 2,198.4 miles.
What do you mean by this year? It changes from year to year? Or?
It does. So it depends on, like sometimes they reroute the trail due to either landowners not allowing the trail to pass through their property anymore, or for safety's sake, the trail is constantly getting rerouted. So it's probably going to be a different mileage next year. And I guess from the inception of the trail, when it first came to be and what the trail is now, there's only 1% of the original trail that still follows along the trail today. Yeah.
Why is that? Because when they reroute it, they don't go back to what it was, or just grows and gets blocked, or is there something else I'm not understanding?
Yeah, it's from what I understand it, there is a lot of politics around, just the land that it's on. So that's constantly changing between landowners, permission from states. And I mean, don't quote me on this. I could be very wrong. I'm not an expert on this. I just walked it. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of it does depend on permission from landowners. So
getting back to the why piece of things. So I know that you want to do it back after picking up that hitchhiker, but why did you choose to do it when you did now instead of 5 years ago, or waiting till some point in the future? Is there any reason you decided to do it as recently as you did?
Just life got in the way. After high school and college, you start your career, you get married, you do all of the adult things, the things that you're supposed to do that are expected of you. And I started my own business in the wedding industry. I'm a wedding filmmaker by trade.
Mhm.
And I would book 2 years in advance for my jobs.
Yeah.
So I never had an open calendar. And then once COVID hit, everybody stopped booking their events. So for the first time in 15 years of owning my business, I had a full summer where I didn't have anything on the books. And honestly, I was so wildly burned out. In 2020, I lost 90% of my business. In 2021, I had to take on essentially twice as much as I normally do between the reschedules and then the organic bookings I already had,
Mhm.
which left me wildly burnt out going into 2022. And, as amazing as my couples were, the thought of having another wedding season was just like morally, it was just crushing me.
Yeah, I bet.
So, I just said, I think walking over 2,000 miles in the woods sounds like a better idea than having another season.
Yeah.
So I took the contact form off my website and I just made it apparent to all my clients, like, hey, I'm taking this year off. I'll see you on the other side. And the timing was just perfect for myself personally. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I have some friends in the wedding industry besides my brother who connected us. But yeah, it sounded like for that year when things got busy again, it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday weddings if you wanted them, and I can imagine that's exhausting. So it sounds like the Appalachian Trail is a good way to recharge and just get away from everybody. And are you looking, before you get back to the Appalachian Trail, you're looking to get back into doing weddings and all that stuff and you feel ready to go, or are you kind of reevaluating?
So I have one more season of filming weddings, that just because I took a financial hit this year just by
Okay.
essentially not making an income this year. So I have one more season that I will be filming, and then I'm still going to remain in the wedding and event industry, just in a different capacity. So, but as far as being behind the camera, I'm hoping to kind of let that go as far as the weddings go. So.
Well, good for you. I bet when you're hiking every day, you have a lot of time to think about things and plan, and your mind can go a million different ways. So I'm sure you thought it all through. Getting back to the hike, you can actually hike this trail from beginning to end, meaning like, are you on an actual trail from beginning to end, or are you walking through towns, or like, I don't understand that logistical side of things.
Yeah, so the trail does pass through a number of towns. Like, you're walking right through the downtown area. The white blazes that guide you along the Appalachian Trail, they're marked in the pavement, they're marked on the telephone poles. Especially in the South, there were a lot of towns that, they were very supportive of the thru hikers, because that's how a lot of them make their income, off of the thru hikers that are passing through. So yeah, so it does go through some very remote sections. Like in Maine, there's a section called the 100-mile wilderness, where
Yeah.
it's basically there's no outlet, really. There are like 3 logging roads that pass through, but they're all privately owned, so you're not really seeing anyone. But then, in Damascus, Virginia, it passes right through the middle of town.
Mhm.
And this year there was a decent amount of rerouting some portions just due to flooding. We had historical flooding this year. I was in New York, just outside of Bear Mountain State Park, and it rained 9.5 inches in one storm. And
Oh my God.
the park still hasn't reopened.
So what are you doing when you're in the middle of that rain? Just like sitting there, you trying to get under cover? Like,
you cry. No.
like, what am I doing?
There's no staying dry. It's just not an option. We have a phrase called "embrace the suck," and you have to, otherwise you'll go absolutely insane.
Mhm.
But with the sections that did flood, usually it was posted, and there would be a road walk that would go around it. So they tried to keep us as safe as possible, but there were some sections where there was just no avoiding it, as far as like river crossings go, and having to ford rivers that, thankfully, when I went through, it was only waist deep. But then when the water table got really high, people are hiking in chest deep water that's rapidly moving. It was not the safest at times, but
wow, that's incredible. So are you sleeping in a tent sometimes, but also in like a hostel or hotel? How does that part of things work?
Yeah, so my main sleep system was my tent. And I primarily use that. If we were expecting rain overnight, then I would stay in a shelter, it's like a lean-to. It's got
Yeah.
one open wall, just because it made it so much easier to pick up camp in the morning,
Mhm.
with keeping your stuff relatively dry. And then there are hostels along the way that I would stop at, and those were fantastic. It was just really well priced. They would help you resupply in town,
Yeah.
and it was a good morale boost, especially given how wet the trail was this year. I hadn't expected to use hostels as much as I did, but it's the trail. It's really 90% mental and 10% physical, and in
Yeah.
order to stay in it mentally, it's like, oh man, dry clothes would be so nice. A hot shower would,
Mhm.
and it's just a beautiful morale boost, like
So
little
that's the
things.
option, but you could also go. How long did it take from beginning to end? A couple months?
5.5 months.
5.5 months. So
Hmm.
I imagine you could go, what, a couple weeks without staying in one of those hostels and getting the hot shower and doing the laundry and all that. So like there's a period of time where it's like probably pretty rough until you get to one of those, or
Yeah, I think the longest I went without stopping at a hostel or in a town, I think it was 13 days with like no shower, no, and yeah, it was time. I
yeah.
needed it, and everyone around me needed me to get off trail and do laundry at that point. It was gross.
I
You're
guess that's
gross out
just what
there.
you have to prepare for when you're doing this, that you're going to have those like long stretches and it's going to be smelly and it's going to be gross. And it's just kind of the mental challenge and the physical challenge of the whole thing. I remember when we hiked Katahdin and it was that last stretch. I mean, the people that were finishing up the Appalachian Trail, you could definitely like smell them,
Oh
like
yeah, because
around
that's
you and at the top of the mountain. You're just like, wow. But it's,
yeah,
it's
because
also,
that's right after the 100-mile wilderness. So
is it?
there, you're there's nothing there are no stops in between
Mhm.
there. So it's like you're getting people like 10 days just fresh out of the woods.
So that last stretch is like one of those long stretches.
Hmm.
Uh, so how about the people that you met along the way, right? Like, are there people that you found yourself with for long stretches, or you really just kind of keep to yourself and everyone's passing by, super helpful? But I wonder if you like, I don't say latch on to people, but like group up for periods of time. Does it work that way?
Yeah, a lot of hikers, they form what they call tramilies, the trail
Mhm.
family, and then they hike the vast majority of the trail with these people. They become their support system, their best friends. And I fell into one for about 200 miles early on, and they were wonderful people. They were so athletic, and I just so wasn't, that I had to back off just because I couldn't comfortably keep up. But I also learned that I felt so I loved the experience of doing it by myself.
Yeah.
I loved hiking by myself. I loved camping by myself. I loved the isolation of it and just being able to be in my own head and thoughts you know, for a long period of time. But there were sections where you'd see someone that you haven't seen in a while, and then you'll go a couple weeks without seeing them, and you'll see them again. So we called it leapfrogging. You
Yeah.
just end up leapfrogging a lot of folks. And there were certain sections of the trail where I'm like, like through the whites in New Hampshire, I'm like, it's really not safe to do it by myself, given the weather that we were having. It was just like hail and rain and no visibility and heavy winds. So I made sure that I was with a great group of women when I
Yeah.
went through that section. But I'd say about like 90% of the trail, I was on my own, and
Wow.
I loved it.
Do you listen to any music or podcasts or anything like that? Or is it just the peace and quiet of the outdoors?
I only allowed myself to listen to music when it was raining,
Yeah.
but even then only when it wasn't thunderstorming, because
Yeah.
I needed to hear how close the
No.
storm was
Mhm.
coming towards me. But the only time I ever allowed myself to listen to music was during rain, because I hate the rain so much.
Really? Wow.
I hate it. So I needed something to look forward to on those
Mhm.
days, and music was it.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I was just in my own head, allowing myself the time to just think and process things that I thought I had already processed from years
Yeah.
ago that apparently I hadn't. I mean, you're walking along, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, like you start processing some like previous trauma, and you just start crying randomly. And I had one hiker who's coming southbound, and he saw me, and I'm in it. And
Yeah.
he's like, "Are you good?" And I'm just like, "I'm healing." And it was this round of applause. But yeah, it was just really nice to have the undistracted time in my own
Yeah.
head.
Yeah. That does
Yeah,
sound nice.
it was nice. You should do
What
the
are some of
Appalachian
the,
Trail.
what's that?
I said you should do the Appalachian Trail. It's a blast.
Yeah, it's an incredible accomplishment. I mentioned to you in an email, I'm like, what is it? What's like a comparable thing? As far as like a feat of endurance and mental strength, it's like the Appalachian Trail seems like one of those top 5 things that you could do in the world that is like that. I mean, what are the other things that are comparable?
I have friends that have done the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, and
Okay.
I have a friend who's on the CDT right now, the Continental Divide Trail. I mean, I guess that's it. I haven't done either one of those, so I can't
What's the
speak to that.
PCT trail? Where's it start and end?
That one that follows the West Coast, so California up through Washington,
Yeah.
and then the CDT. I think there are a few different routes, but it's basically Canada to Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that one is 3,100 miles. The PCT is like 2,653 ish. But
So both a little bit longer, but that's insane. But yeah, as far as these type of hikes go, it's just like an incredible accomplishment. How many people do it each year? Do you know?
I think this year they had around 3,000 people start the Appalachian Trail, and roughly 25% finish it.
No kidding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're one of about 750 people ish that finished it
I
in
guess so.
2023. Quite an accomplishment. Holy cow. What are some of the most memorable stops along the way, along the trail, in terms of like views or cities or anything? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I had one spot in West Virginia, this section called Crescent Rock. It was so hot and humid through that section that nothing would dry overnight. So I found this rock outcrop, and I just threw all my clothes out there to dry out in the sun. And all of a sudden these 2 planes come by and they start practicing aerials. So they're doing like loop-de-loops and corkscrews, and I'm in the middle of West Virginia sitting on this mountain, and I just have a private aerial show. And it was just
Wow.
one of the coolest moments I had on trail. It was awesome.
That is so cool. What are the chances? Are there any particularly hard parts, like physically hard, like just like a narrow area on a mountain, or just someplace you didn't feel safe, like, or is it all just pretty straightforward hiking?
New Hampshire tried to kill me. Yeah, which growing up, I had only ever hiked in New Hampshire and Maine before. And I've done the vast majority of the New Hampshire Appalachian Trail before. So I knew what I was getting into, but the weather was just so bad pretty much the whole time, that, in the past I'd been lucky to, if I'm hiking and it's not safe, you get to tree line, you're like, oh, I'm just going to turn around and go back. Well, you can't really do that on a through hike. So I got to Moose Lock in New Hampshire, and I get above tree line, and it is 0 visibility, well over 50-mile-an-hour winds, rain. In the first 1,800 miles, I had fallen twice on trail. And on Moose Lock, I fell 7 times. And it was just, if I weren't through hiking, I would have turned around and gone back down. Yeah. But it's like, well, you can't really do that. I mean, you could, but no.
But you'd have to do it again at some. You'd have to climb back up at some point. What's exactly. Falling? What do you mean, like tripping and banging your knee, or are you like actually falling down some?
Oh, like Supermaning across some rocks, just like just taking diggers that make you stop and just do a Peter Griffin on Family Guy, like
Yeah, and really you, I guess, have to grind through it, like you said. Do people get hurt probably pretty bad on this?
One of my friends, her trail name is Dragonfly. She actually broke her wrist in New York. And she went to urgent care. They confirmed, yes, it is broken. They put her in a cast and said, you should probably take it easy for a little bit. And she laughed and got back on trail the next day. And I actually ended up summiting the same day as her.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She kept going.
I could see that. I mean, wrist, you might obviously it'd be bad if you slipped and fell and hit your wrist or something like that, but you can still have your feet. It's, a different story if you break a leg or an ankle or something like that. You probably have to take a break, but good for her for finishing. Yeah. So you finished with her, and how many other people?
Or you
just happened to meet her at the top. You might not have summited together, but what was that summit like?
Well, the summit day, it was very busy on Katahdin because I summited September 15th, and we had that hurricane coming in that was slated to come in on somewhere at the end of the week there. So pretty much when I got into the 100-mile wilderness, you don't have a lot of cell service. You can't really check the weather. So I originally wanted to summit on the 14th, but the weather was calling for 70% chance of thunderstorms. And I'm like, after all of this shit weather I've had this entire time, like I want a good summit day.
Mm-hmm.
So the weather was calling for the one clear day, and that entire time frame was September 15th.
Yeah.
So everyone that had planned to summit on the 14th pushed to the 15th, and everyone that was scheduled to summit on the 16th bumped ahead to the 15th to avoid the hurricane that was coming. Yeah. So
which was actually kind of a bust.
It was. I mean, we still got a decent amount of rain
True.
up in that section. But yeah, the hurricane ended up being a bust, which is great. But yeah, and it was very busy at the summit. There were well over probably like 25 people up there. And I've done Katahdin before, and in the past it was just myself and my friend who I was hiking with. So I wasn't prepared to have a whole onslaught of people watching me ugly cry at the top of the mountain, but they got it.
So when you got up to the top, is that the first thing you did? Like cried with happiness for the achievement and just kind of took it all in?
Yeah, it was really, I mean, you're out there for 5.5 months exposing yourself to just awful weather, just you're always thinking about that end goal, and then all of a sudden there it is. And it was very, very, even that whole week leading up to it, it was very emotional. But yeah,
just to make it as far as you did, like you said, that last week, you really can kind of see the finish line a little bit at that point, especially when you're on that last 100 miles of 2,300 miles. It's like, this is happening.
Yeah.
Because how many miles do you do a day? Like
it depends on the section. So in the South, it was very easy to do 20 plus mile days. I had a 30-mile day at one point. I had multiple marathon days. But then once I got to New Hampshire, my pace and my mileage was cut in half, if not more so. So it was,
going up and down more mountains in New Hampshire versus
the elevation increase. Yeah. The terrain is much more difficult. It's much steeper. And yeah, they call Mount Washington and Mount Madison the rock pile, and it's a very accurate representation of that. So it's just completely different terrain from a nice dirt path in the South to your bouldering and scrambling. And to add the weather that we had in New England this year on top of that, New Hampshire tried to kill me.
I just figured the whole thing was that though. So it's interesting to hear that the southern part is a little easier maybe, and that things get a little bit tougher on the stretch.
I was shocked at, just growing up in Maine and New Hampshire, only having ever hiked New Hampshire and Maine before, you always get views. You always hit above tree line. At the end of every hike, you are rewarded with something beautiful to see. But the Appalachian Trail, very little of it actually hits real summits and real viewpoints. So they refer to Virginia as the Green Tunnel, which is very accurate. You're just walking in trees, and unless you take what's called a blue blaze or another trail, you're not going to get any views. So
did you ever do that, or is it just like full steam ahead?
Yeah. I'm a sucker for sunrises and sunsets, so I would try to work my campsites or even hiking the blue blazes to get some good views. And I'd do that. So I'm not like a traditionalist. I'm not a purist, as they call them on the trail, where you have to hike every single mile of the Appalachian Trail. I'm like, no, there's a blue blaze that takes me to waterfalls and swimming holes, and I can like skirt this section but still end up at the same shelter that I was going for. Yeah. I'm gonna do that.
People are so weird. The idea that that's like a thing for purists, but I get it. You said you passed people going the other direction. So do some people start in Maine and finish down there, or is it more common to start the way that you started?
It's more common to go northbound, but there is a decent amount that will start at Katahdin and head south. Mm-hmm. And then there are also people that it's called flip-flopping. So they'll start in the south or in the north and go south. And then I feel like the most common one is people that start in the south. They get to a midpoint, like say Harper's Ferry, and then they know that they won't make it to Katahdin in time before Baxter State Park closes for the season. Yeah. So then they'll fly up to Maine and then meet back down in the middle where they left off. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah, that's cool. You did the mileage, you did the trail, you saw the whole thing. So it's whatever way works for you. That makes sense to me, what you just said. So you get to the top, you're finished, you're celebrating, and now you have to come down, are for like people waiting for you to get, like, how do you get back from there? Like, is someone ready to jump in a car and drive home, or what's that like?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. My partner started the trail with me and he
Mhm.
also ended. So he came
Okay.
down to Georgia with me and we did Springer together. He did the first night on trail with me and
Mhm.
then he also finished. So I met him
Okay.
that morning in the parking lot at I think it was A-Ball Bridge.
Mhm.
And then we went up and finished Katahdin and really like when we got back down to the parking lot after it was all said and done, I just looked at him like, all right, now what?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
like? It must be. It's like you're re-entering civilization after being
Hmm.
away for 5.5 months. Was there an adjustment period to any of that stuff, to sleeping in your bed or
Oh
having a
yeah.
TV on or something like that? Is this, you
I'm
know?
still in the adjusting period.
Yeah.
2 months, like it'll be 2 months tomorrow that I summited. But yeah, I joke with my friends. I'm like, yeah, I'm still a little feral. You know, it's like some social norms. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't be blowing snot rockets out in public anymore. Gotta
So you
reel that
feel like a
in.
different person, maybe? Is like do you feel changed through the whole thing?
I do. It's my perspective has
Mhm.
definitely shifted. One thing I noticed, so actually your brother, I did a job for him down in Boston shortly after I summited.
Mhm.
And I was thinking like, oh man, this is gonna be tough to go from the woods down to a big city. It wasn't so much the city aspect that I noticed, it was how stressed out people were. And
Mhm.
like everything was on fire, everything is pure chaos. And I'm like, I'm taking pretty pictures and pretty video. There is no emergency with any of this. Like we're all going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And then hitting traffic too on my way home. In 1 hour I went about 9 miles, but I'm still like 9 miles an hour. That is fantastic. That is like I'm going to be 2 states away by the end of the day. I am going
Yeah.
like lightning speed. This is great.
That's such interesting perspective. I
Mhm.
mean, like when you're just living your normal life. I mean, I can see it in my own life. Just things are stressful. You want things now, or you're just consumed with all this stuff that really is not that important at the end of the day. So it's kind of cool to really get that perspective, and hopefully it's something you kind of carry through with you moving
Yeah.
forward and are able to remind people along the way, like me right now. So it's nice to hear. What's the advice you would give to anybody thinking about doing the Appalachian Trail?
Just do it. You will not regret it. You know, planning financially is, you have to do that. I made the mistake of taking advice from previous through hikers, but they had hiked pre-COVID. So
Mhm.
like I hadn't taken into account inflation or any of that. So my budget was vastly under what it should have been,
Mhm.
but I don't regret any of it. I would say do it when you're younger. There were a lot of folks that were retired that were doing it and they were amazing. Like, just how strong they were mentally and physically was really inspiring. But
Mhm.
a lot of times talking with them, they would mention that they wish that they had done it when they were younger and their bodies were, able to support such
Yeah.
an endeavor a little bit easier. And I feel like I turned 39 on trail, and for
Mhm.
me, I think it was the perfect time for
Yeah.
me to do it and to take that break from work, from society, really, and just to allow myself that time to
Mhm.
just be with myself and process and do something for myself, not what society tells you should do on the timeline that society tells you to do it. So, yeah.
Love it. Love it. So I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I honestly really enjoyed hearing about it. Like, I'm very happy for you got to do it. I'm kind of jealous. And it's the first time I've really dug into everything about the Appalachian Trail. So thanks again so much for running me through it all.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, you should do it. Start planning, you know?
Love it. God, man, it's an amazing accomplishment. I'll tell my wife that. I'll see what she thinks. Maybe she'd
Yes.
want to join me.
Bring her along, bring the
All
kid.
right. Well, it's nice talking to you. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much.